Hello, I'm Bruce Rice. I'm the Saskatchewan Poet Laureate living here in Regina, Saskatchewan. And I wanted to do this today because we've recently seen a lot on the news about the killing of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis just recently. And it's reminded me of a lot of things. But before I do this, I want to read a few poems based on some of the things that we see happening. But first I want to do a land acknowledgement. We happen to be on Treaty 4 territory, which is the traditional homeland of the Saulteaux, Nakota, Dakota, Lakota, and Cree people, and also the homeland of the Métis. And I'm very happy to be here for lots of reasons. Years ago, when I was just a kid, I was growing up in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. I'd never seen a black person, not until 14, and I had to leave the country to do that. And yet, on our news, on the CBC, black and white television sets, we were following the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King down in the United States, and all of Canada, I think, was watching that every night. And personally, I wanted to go down and help out with the marching and to help out with the protests that were going on at that time. Little did I know that my time and energy would have been just as well spent walking down the hill to River Street, Prince Albert, and protesting perhaps the conditions of Indigenous people in this country, the residential school that we had in our community, what was going on in terms of health, life expectancy, and the language and culture. But yet, out of all that was going on, I think there was this taste for justice that was part of my growing up, and it was part of a lot of Canadians of my generation as well. So I wanted to salute that with this memory of those times. And I wanted to celebrate, I think, the taste for justice that we all have. And let's recognize that in our response to what's going on today. I've just completed a new collection of poetry called the Vivian poems, and Vivian Meyer was a street photographer who lived and worked as a nanny in Chicago, among other places, but most of her life was spent in Chicago. And she was a sympathizer with the civil rights movement, and one of the pinnacle years of one of the most productive years of her work was 1968, and the middle section of the book is based on that. But during that year, we saw in April the assassination of Martin Luther King. In June, there was the shooting of Robert Kennedy. And in August, there was the disastrous Chicago Democratic Convention. And at the convention, Mayor Richard Daley of Chicago brought in his police and also troops to put down the anti-Vietnam War protests that were going on outside the convention, and did a lot of other things. So I just want to read from that section of the book, and it's a section that I don't want to chop up, and that's why I want to do this all as one piece. And it opens with a quote from Studs Terkel. In 1963, Studs, the famous Chicago journalist, traveled with about 800 people from Chicago to the March on Washington, and they took 2 trains to get there. And as he was interviewing people live, he was reflecting on it. And what Studs said then was, if this hope were to be brutally destroyed, a new kind of massacre of innocence would have occurred. I think the sense of tenderness we have experienced would readily become a source of danger for the whole country. And 5 years later, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, Robert Kennedy was on his way to a campaign rally in Indianapolis. He was running for the Democratic primary. And he didn't have his aides write the speech for him. He wrote it himself in the back of the limousine on the way to the gathering. And in that speech, he quotes Aeschylus. Aeschylus is the father of Greek tragedy. And the quote that Kennedy used at that time was this: "Even in our sleep, pain, which cannot forget, falls drop by drop on the heart, until in our despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." And here's Vivian's response to the shooting of King. Now she's up in a room in the house of the people whose children she's watching. "How tall can we make the letters in a word? I cannot move. The time stacks so deep in my room, I can't reach my bed, so I sleep on the floor. Sifting a question, what kind of people are we? Flag-wrapped idiots who dream up things to ring the country with? Assassinate. Too small a word for what's in our throats. Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget. I warn the children, stay clear of me today. But the sidewalks already know the song. The one about monkeys jumping on a bed. One falls off and bumps his lovely head. It's all so simple. We've heard rifle fire before. And this inhalation before the elegy, as grief falls drop by drop on the heart. Faces today on the loop moved me. Resistance moves me. Outside their makeshift churches, what I heard moved me. Dragged to jail, they sang or kept on. I was humbled in hope and in loneliness. I'm not a marcher, though I try to believe in the urgency of now, like King said, and that unearned suffering is redemptive. But what if there's only the great until in our despair, against our will? What kind of people are we? Bobby spoke from the deck of a flatbed truck. All it took was a question people needed to hear. I don't know who Aeschylus was, except his tragedies came in threes. No one is spared, and it's only a hope that with suffering comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. And the day after, shortly after Martin Luther King was killed, riots and demonstrations broke out all across the United States, just as they have been recently, only there were more of them, I believe. And so Vivian takes her camera and goes to Chicago's West Side. So this is called After the Riot, Chicago West Side after the shooting of Martin Luther King. Too expensive to be ashamed. Cameras detest and love this. A war zone, a word to attach to the 6 o'clock news. Black Panthers, juvenile youth, blacks and their gangs, 6 o'clock faces explain. But gangs don't do this. 2 miles of Madison gone, flags downtown at half-mast for King, or maybe for this. Pathetic. My cover is a nanny riding alone. Past basement still smoking as walls nail into them. No flags here, but the bus still runs, gasping at each stop in the weird silence. Whites take seats by themselves, read the Tribune or stare out the window. It was no easy dream. Some lunatic ended. At California and Madison, I get out and walk west. Other women walking as if they're lost. There's something they urgently need but can't think what. It's a strange addiction. I look in the remains of houses. People still believe if there is no photograph, it never happened. Funerals, weddings, and this. It's foolish to think my camera will keep me safe. 2 boys on bikes, dressed quite neatly. One says, "We just wanted to see." 10 years old. But now it's the place where the memory happened. Shoes, bloody clothes, caps in the park, and everything left behind. I keep my nerve. I know what moves me. A yellow backhoe with its scoop on the ground. A posture of mourning that both is and isn't true. Except for the reflex in front of a camera. Not smiling, no. 2 city workers eating a sandwich. They seem relaxed. There's no hurry, and some jobs never get done. Outside her store, this white woman poses, her grown son too, as if they're in prison. They don't know what they'll do. It's calm, but maybe the west side is not done erupting. And they're slaves with no way to flee this bewildered Roman holiday town. Mother and son, food for the ashes. The poor I know work all the time. 3 jobs at least. Hawking in stalls in December, boiling or freezing, cleaning hotels. Do I need to describe it? Picturesque faces which left of themselves would say, "We're fed up." The city's on fire, are really on fire. A committee can't fix it. Maybe they'll shoot and maybe they won't. This is the terrible flaw of a lie and what it looks like. Then on June 5th, 1968, there was a shooting of Robert Kennedy. And Vivian up in her room says, "It can't seem to let itself end." Children in bed. Papers quote one another and come up with nothing that hasn't been said. 24 years since Normandy, but today missed the beach and landed in some hotel in LA. We're broken so badly we can't even weep for the hero, the elegized dream our dream took root in, a thing we'll never get back. And then in August, in the days leading up, a couple of days before the Chicago Convention, the president sent Roger Wilkins from the U.S. Justice Department to meet with Mayor Daley to try to head off the confrontation that was coming between Daley's police force and the anti-war demonstrators outside the convention. And coming out of that meeting, remembering it afterwards, Wilkins said, "He was in charge. When I walked away from Daley's office, I thought, we're going to have violence. He's going to unleash his police department." Richard J. Daley was the embodiment of power, so tightly wrapped in its own righteousness that it couldn't hear any words echoed back, but those words that are echoed back from his own mouth. And during a pause in the demonstrations, in the protests, Vivian takes her charge, little Inga Raymond, down so she can do some photographs during the demonstrations, and there's this quiet period. And I think there was a newspaper headline that said, "The world is watching us." So this poem is called Watching Us, and it's Vivian again. Little Inger is afraid the police will kill us. The world tuning in must wonder what planet we live on. An eerie radiance at night, men with nightsticks and gas masks coming out of the fog. This college boy sleeps, sitting up on a bench, face in his hands. I've seen beggars do this before. His friends bedrolled, lined up on the lawn, respectful, as if it were summer camp. Richard J. Daly, one of the Titans, a phone strike, the electrician's strike, stopping the news and cameras looking in. The world is watching us. From the 25th floor of the Hilton, Hubert Humphrey surveys a scene from some other country. Tear gas, police, the Vietnam War come home. First King, then Bobby. This feels like one more funeral. The elegies garble, and words won't redeem us. I need pictures, but my heart has gone out of it. I say, Inger, let's go. Let's find that red coat of yours. Pretend it's winter and snow has covered us up. Let's say the crashing and chants are a band practicing on Soldier Field, and the megaphone's warning is part of a game that goes back and forth until we fall down, laughing until our sides ache. And this bench is grateful to have served its purpose, a place to see things and reflect on them, and to bring them out like a photograph when reflection is missing and we can't quite remember the day. Thank you, and please go forward in peace and remember your courage and your days for justice as well.